The thing that you want to do once you figure out where you're going to pour your concrete is to go ahead and line your countertops with concrete backer board. The concrete backer board gives stability to the concrete countertops as well as gives something for the concrete to adhere to. Next, you want to put on your concrete countertop forms. We went with the Z counter form system, which includes a full bullnose edge, a back edge, and a fiber mesh with Z clips for strength.
You use zinc coated construction screws. They're actually made by Z counter forms. Can't give it too much oomph because all it's hooking into is concrete board. You put the back strip on so that you have something to run a screed board across to smooth your concrete across the top.
So this piece here covers up the hole where the faucet goes in so that the concrete will come up to it, but your faucet will still be able to attach down in.
So, what we're doing is putting in a fiber mesh, which is a lot like rebar in normal concrete. And Easy Counterforms has made these handy little Z-clips that you screw down to your hardy backer and just clip your fiber mesh into them. It holds it up so that you get concrete underneath and concrete on top.
I had to put a piece of wood there to block the concrete from coming out the end of the front there. And then over here where the dishwasher was, pull the dishwasher back out, we had to put a piece of 2x4 up there to be able to hold the weight of the concrete while it's drying. Once it's dry, then we can remove the 2x4 and stick the dishwasher back in there. Clean the sink with alcohol to allow the sink form to stick in place so that the concrete has something to butt up against and it doesn't go inside of your sink. Now it is time to put the sink form in place. The two things you will need is the sink form itself as well as a heat gun to help mold the sink form into its desired location. This is where you will wish that you had octopus arms, and having multiple hands is a very handy thing. Lay a board across the front edge and the back edge to help with leveling. Peel the adhesive covering and start placing the sink form to the back of the sink up against the bottom of the board. Move the board along with you around the sink to help keep the edging level as you move. When you get to the corners, this is where the heat gun comes in handy. You heat the piece to help make it pliable to fit into the corners. When you get to the end, you will likely have extra. What you need to do is form them together, find out where they butt up against each other, cut the excess off, and then go ahead and stick it down. Now it's time to tape the seam together to help hold it in place.
Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to lay a silicone bead right around this edge here. Keep the concrete from going into the sink. And then we'll pull that silicone out after we strip this unit off. I'm going to, start here in the front so you can see and then work my way around the back, I guess. I don't really want any giant globs. So we're just going to take our finger and kind of smooth that seal. And the reason for the wad of paper towels, so I can get rid of the excess. Yes, sir.
Okay, so since we are messing with concrete, we went ahead and we laid down plastic all over the floors. Sometimes it gets a little sloppy. It did in my house anyway. We also lined the sink with the plastic as well. I wonder if he knows he left the scissors in there. Guess we're not going to use the scissors right away, or we have to peel them out. But anyway, basically it is just to make sure that we don't get concrete on the floors that are already laid, on the cabinets that are lower, because the upper ones should be okay, and then in the sink. If we get a little on the back wall, we're going to cover that up with backsplash, which is a good thing since we have that little cutout thing. So it's not as big a deal.
You want it coated, but not with a lot of globs. And when you have a bunch of comedians in the house, they try to get you to eat it like ice cream.
We also came through and put caulk here between the two pieces of backer board where there was a little bit of gap so the concrete didn't fall through. Like I've said before, no project is complete without a trip to Lowe's. The concrete mixer is probably one of the best investments we have made. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah.
We have helpers. There's one right there. One right there. The other one just ran off. He'll be back. Once your dry concrete mix has been added to the concrete mixer, it's time to add in the water and let the mixer do its thing and turn the powder into concrete. I found our third helper. He's right there. Axel! Axel Bob! There's our third helper. Keep adding water until you reach your desired consistency.
Take off these buckets.
Now that your concrete has been made up, it is time to start pouring it into the formed countertops. So we think that our concrete is a little bit on the thick side.
Please.
So the one thing you do have to worry about is getting enough concrete down into there so that you get the rounded front.
And we will use our orbital sanders with no pads on them to help bring the bubbles to the surface. As you watch, it's drawing that concrete right down in
Now it is time to screed, or else level off the concrete to make sure that the concrete, one, is level, and two, that you have enough concrete to cover up any holes that might form or arise as you are sliding the concrete down. We're using a magnesium float.
draws the water to the surface so that your aggregate is covered in a thin layer of the concrete mix, or lime and water, which is what makes it smooth.
We may have to do a little bit of fine sanding, but
We still have to let this dry for a little while, and then we run a steel float on it. And the steel float gives you your next level of smoothness.
is that tonight?
Yes. Yes, this is going to be a
Long night.
Mark spends the evening playing with concrete.
Again, we are running an orbital sander with no sanding pad on it so that we can help make sure that the bubbles come to the surface and make sure that the fronts are fully filled.
Come look, you can watch the bubbles come up. Turn over right there, Tom. Not as many bubbles coming up over here because these sides have been here longer. So I've already fixed a lot of them. Every once in a while, a little chunk of aggregate will pop up like that rock right there. And push it back down.
Yes.
So the holes will get filled in when I run my float on it again. Any of them that are left at the end, we can, they make a filler that comes in a tube that goes in a caulk gun. And you just take that tube and put it on there, rub it across with your finger, smooth it out, sand it off, done. Putting moisture on it and floating it with a steel float.
Because we had cracks forming.
And some holes. And because it was time to steel float it. Little test pull
Okay.
here. You ready? Okay, so we're gonna do a little test pull. Pull this out of here, if I can get it to come. See if that concrete's ready to turn loose, and it is. So we're gonna very gently just pull this fancy little ring right out around the edge. So now you pull the silicone out, if you can get it to come out. Sometimes you got to get like a pick to get it to start.
Once you're to this point, you want to start working on taking the silicone out. While it sounds like it would be better to take the silicone out once the concrete is all hardened, it actually makes it a lot more difficult to get it out. And this is why my sink has been up and running since 2019, and I still pull silicone out.
So these are called Z counterforms, and in an earlier part of the video you'll see that we screwed them to the backer board underneath. They have a pre-perforated piece right under the back here where you just fold them out and they just snap off. The piece that we screwed down will stay underneath there, but you'll never see it. Oh, that looks like crap. And then, if you're really lucky, when it pops off, it'll dump gravel inside your shoe for you. Move, you can pull off the block, which is a pretty decent spot over there. Okay, here we go. This one come loose. It's hard on the fingers.
It probably doesn't help that you're having to pull that corner.
It does.
Now it's time to do the touch-up sanding. Any kind of spots that need to be removed or smoothed out, this is the time to do it with the sander. This will make a dusty mess, so be prepared.
And here you go. You can watch me go.
It's time to prep your sink and your lower cabinets and floor. That way you can keep the stain and the epoxy off of and out of the sink and the floors.
So we're putting a two-part epoxy on, which consists of a resin, which is what I have draining in here, part A. It's upside down there, but it's a 1-to-1 ratio between the resin and its hardener, which is what is in this other jug over here that I almost dropped. So you get yourself a measuring jug like this, and you watch how far up you're putting your resin because it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and you want to make sure that you put the same amount of each in. Because we're down to the last of these 2 bottles, I'm going to just put all of this hardener in because that should meet the correct amount. when you mix it, it's going to come to a milky color. You want to keep mixing it until it turns to a clear color again before you start putting it down. We'll not mix this with a mixer. They'll use a paint stirrer, and there's a good reason for that. It tends to draw a little bit extra air into it. But this is our first coat, so it's going to have a ton of air bubbles anyway. You see it turned that milky color, and if you'll watch it as we stir it here in a few minutes, it'll start clearing up. So we'll clean our mixer off. And then we just lay it somewhere out of the way. Excuse the mess over there. This is a construction site. Sort of. So you want a spreader, and I use a paintbrush to do the edges, and apparently to brush the dust off. But anyway, you'll see me use the paintbrush here to paint these edges. We'll paint this edge in here with it. And we may go ahead and start with that first before we pour it on. Because our countertops are cracked, this stuff will roll down inside the cracks and leave an area like we have over here where that crack is. That crack, when we put our second coat on, will fill in just like it did over here. Wherever that crack ended up going, you can't even see it now. It was somewhere right in this neighborhood. See, that's how good it fills it. You can't even find it anymore. Right through there. Ideally, you don't want cracks in your countertop. But when you're doing what you're doing and you're in a hurry to get it done, you get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. So we're going to start with the inside of this sink ring. I think I'm going to paint back here instead of pouring, just because it's a small area. It's pretty thick stuff, but it takes a long time to set. So you do have time to manipulate it after you've gotten it on there. We put plastic on everything, including the countertop fronts, so that we don't have to worry about getting this on the floor or the cabinets. This is our hole where our faucet is going to go, so we want it sealed up nicely around the edges. Remember not to get it on anything that you don't want it on permanently. It will stick.
We've also decided that since the fronts of the countertops show a different color than the countertops themselves, that we are going to go in with a pigment and change the color of it.
Yeah, the pigment will show up here later today with some more epoxy that we had to order. The unfortunate side to this is that no one carries this epoxy, this two-part epoxy like this in stock that I have found.
Not local here.
Not locally here. Lowe's, that would be a really good idea if you would start doing that. It'd be extremely helpful, because this type of countertop is starting to gain quite a bit of popularity over other styles, because it tends to be a little cheaper and you get an almost granite quality if you do it right. I didn't do it right, but if you do it right, you get an almost granite quality out of your countertop for a lot less money. And on top of that, you get one continuous piece of counter with no seams. You want it to go on relatively thick. It will lay itself out smooth. So if you see these little bumps like this, it's not going to stay like that. It will flow for probably 3 or 4 hours. Honestly, it flows for a pretty good long while before it starts to really set up to a point that it won't move.
So it takes the countertops from being that color to being this color. And I can show you pictures here in just a minute. I'll link some pictures of the color my countertops started because we stained them with concrete countertop stains. And it reminds me of an army camo color. And then I'll show you pictures.
It's almost kind of ugly when you look at it before we put the epoxy on it. But the epoxy makes a difference in the color of your countertops.
And it's night and day difference. It's completely.
They don't look like the same countertops. Our friend Jared's has a black color with like a gold sparkly flake pigment in it. Because I'm doing our first coat here, I am not focused heavily on getting it really thick. I am focused on getting everything covered because our first coat tends to bubble and have to be sanded. Now you get to see me pull up my shirt and try to not get this epoxy. So there's a lesson that I just learned. Always learning something, or at least you should be always learning something. Make sure you do the back edge in a corner like this before you do the front edge, and then have to reach across it. It takes a lot more epoxy than you would think it should to do this. This was I want to say it was a 1.5 gallon kit. It was either a 1.5 or a 1 gallon kit. But I feel like it was a 1.5. Anyway, it doesn't go as far as you would hope. But we'll get what we can get. It's the other thing about this that's kind of nice is it's pretty forgiving, in all honesty, because like I said, number one, it flows, and two, if you don't like the way it looks when you're finished, you can sand it as smooth as you need to, and then you can go back and put epoxy over it, and even though you've sanded it and turned it into a milky color, the epoxy, the next layer, will actually just fill in the sanding grooves and make it look shiny again. We might get there by George. You got her. Now, after you do the epoxy part and get the epoxy all on, you will find that there will be bubbles coming out of it, especially with your first layer. The first coat on new countertops is always the worst because the concrete is porous, so it holds air. So, to combat the air, we will make use of a heat gun. And as you run the heat gun across it, you will see bubbles just pop like crazy. You can even see the little tiny pin bubbles that you couldn't see before will start popping. And what you'll do is, you'll do this 6 or 7 times over the next couple of hours until we get to the point where most of the bubbles will be out of it. You'll still have a few, that will show up eventually, and there's really nothing you can do about that. However, to fix them, what you do is you'll run your before you run your next coat of epoxy, you will sand those bubble spots down. Just take a little piece of sandpaper and knock the nipple off the top of them, and in doing so, you'll make it flat again, and then when you put your next coat of epoxy on, it will fill that hole in. And you'll notice down underneath here there will be little drips, and if you come back through there when it just starts to set up, probably 3 or 4 hours in, you can take a knife or a scraper or a paint stirring stick what I used the other day that I had used for stirring, and you just knock those bumps off. There's still some over there on the other side where she's showing you, but not nearly as many as there were, and they're not nearly as tall as they were. Now, this is a new brand of epoxy that I've not used before. But I kind of like it. It's a lot thinner than some of the others that I was using in previous layers and portions of this video. There's trade-offs. Sometimes the thinner the better, and sometimes not so much. You want to make sure that does not get on anything else. That jug of stuff needs to come off the counter. All I needed was just this. I didn't have hands. Yes. Okay. And then I could use a paint stirring stick out of that bucket over there with the yellow top on it. Okay. Here's how we do this, kids. Put our tools a little ways away. And we just pour a little out. That we want to start with. And I'll take our scraper and we'll kind of move it around so that everything gets a good solid coat. Like so.
How much does this need to film?
Not a ton.
Because we decided to go ahead and add the pigment after our first layer of epoxy was on, one thing that you need to make sure is that you get everything that was previously epoxied covered. That way you have this pigment all over the surface of your counters.
Yep. Alright, so we were concerned because our areas look different between the 2 different batches we made. You see it's got a silvery tone here, and over here where I made a huge mess, it has a really black tone. We were concerned that they were going to look completely different. However, come back over here and watch this. We're from the Missouri, the Show Me State, so we're going to show you. The silvery part turns out to actually just be small air bubbles. And as you move your heat gun across it, they disappear. And everything becomes one solid, pearlized black color, which is exactly what we were going for.